But there we go. So we're just going to wait a couple minutes here to start. Is it true that we only have half of Kiana so far? That she has not rejoined with the second half?
I think I am here. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Yeah,
Okay,
my webcam's cool. Not working properly, so I think I'll have to have my video off. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Okay, well, I don't know. What do you think, Kiana and Emily? Should we start now or wait another minute? You're both muted, so I don't know what you think.
Yeah, we can just wait maybe another minute. Maybe a couple more people will pop on, and then we can get started with the group that we have. Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Great. I think a fun thing would be, while we're waiting, if people want to write into the chat what your favorite tree is. I'd love to hear what people put. We've got one madrone and one Oregon ash and a Gary oak. And a redwood and gigantic sequoia. I am definitely with Lauren and Jim on that. And someone who loves all of them. And a Stewardship, I don't know that one. Kawanza flowering cherry, western red cedar. Oh, we've got so many good trees here. Narda, I love your sense of humor. My favorite tree is a standing living tree. Yes, you will be hearing more as we go forward about efforts to try to keep trees living. Okay, well, not seeing more people popping in, I think we should start. So my name is Lynn Fitzhugh. I'm with Thurston Climate Action Team, and we are co-presenting this with the Thurston Conservation District, and Kiana and Emily will be also presenting after me as part of this. So I'm going to be talking for the first probably 15 minutes about why trees are a climate issue and why they're important in general. And then they will be following with talking about how you select the right tree for your property and all kinds of other good information about trees. So that is what we're doing. And why is this not progressing? Oh dear. Okay. There we go. Okay. So tree benefits. So we have just lots and lots of tree benefits. Trees are taking pollutants out of the air. They are cooling our cities, sometimes by 2 to 4 degrees in an area where there is trees. They are reducing health problems ranging from cardiac disease to strokes to asthma. They are protecting biodiversity, providing habitat for birds and pollinators. Sometimes that's the only habitat they have is trees. reducing obesity levels by increasing people's willingness to go out and be in the street, etc. Managing stormwater, which in our area, with the amount of rain we get, is really a very critical function. And increasing neighborhood property values. Studies actually show that they very much do that. And reducing stress. There are studies that show if people can see even one tree out their window, they're less likely to be depressed. So on the lowering asthma issue again, low-income neighborhoods tend to have fewer trees, so there's an environmental justice issue here too about where we have trees and how that impacts low-income neighborhoods. The city of Olympia has a lot of street trees, and they've removed 2,500 pounds of air pollutants a year. So that says a lot about the importance of the trees that we have. Oh gosh, now it's doing this thing again where it's not wanting to switch. I don't understand why it's doing this. There. Okay, so preventing heat islands. And this is actually Olympia that you can see. And the red areas are where it's hotter because of asphalt that we have. So heat islands are areas that can be as much as 12 degrees higher because of the amount of asphalt. The asphalt is reflecting the sun and therefore heating things up. This means that we have, in the summertime, more people trying to do air conditioning. We have more air pollution as a result of it, more greenhouse gases emitted, and ultimately in really hot conditions we can have more mortality because of it. So trees help with the cooling of that by providing shade, absorbing the solar radiation, providing natural air conditioning via what's called transpiration, and cleaning the air, which allows the heat to escape into space. And we're having problems again with the, I don't understand this. Okay, lowering energy needs. So, we luckily live in an area that does not require a lot of air conditioning, but buildings are our second highest polluter in Thurston County, and trees that are in proximity to buildings can cool them. In fact, if a tree is within 6 feet of 6 yards of a house, you will have a lower cooling and heating bills as a result. That has been calculated by Heidi Zargamahe to be about $330 a year in annual savings per tree. That is close enough to create that effect, and huge savings overall for the city as a result of just the street trees. So stormwater retention, which I mentioned earlier, our urban canopy is reducing and slowing stormwater by intercepting the rain. The water infiltrates into the soil around the trees rather than running down the street and creating flooding. Trees can help prevent erosion, which is really a critical thing. People have seen in areas where there was a hill where they cut all the trees down for some kind of development that then there can wind up being a landslide. And our evergreen trees are particularly effective at doing this. Wildlife habitat. Trees provide food and shelter for various kinds of insects, small mammals, and birds. So there's all kinds of physical benefits to having trees around. They boost the immune system, they lower blood pressure, they reduce stress, they decrease depression levels, help children who have ADHD, accelerate recovery from surgery or illness, increase energy levels, improve sleep. This is all from studies, and there's a footnote there about that. Of course, as we know, they are beautiful. But a really important thing is they're carbon sinks. So trees absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The carbon is stored in its roots and in the soil, thus reducing carbon emissions in the air. Carbon sequestration in this way helps to maintain and regenerate the surrounding community of trees and other plants. As long as the tree is allowed to live, it continues to store carbon. So anybody who's a gardener will tell you that when you have carbon-rich soil, that's actually much more productive soil. So that's great that we're drawing it down through the trees. Trees take in carbon dioxide. The street trees in Olympia collect and sequester more than 420,000 pounds of carbon every year. Each street tree on average has
I think your sound cut out for a second there.
Huh. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
I don't know why that happened. Each street tree on average stores over 2,000 pounds of carbon in its lifetime and continues to store carbon as it grows. Street trees in Olympia have stored more than 5 million pounds of carbon. So just to be clear, we're drawing down every year, so that's something that's being removed every year, and then each tree is also storing carbon, so that's sort of a double benefit. The annual drawdown is 2.7% of our total emissions per year. Our county-wide, our trees are stored about 14 years worth of our total emissions. So, that gives you a picture of how really important our trees are in our overall carbon reduction strategies. Really important thing for people to understand is that all trees are not equal in that strategy of drawdown. The older the tree is, the bigger the tree is, the more it's drawing down carbon. Trees increase in their rate of carbon storage each year, well beyond 100 years for some species. And this is why we can't replace them when development happens with saplings. You'll often hear planters saying, oh yeah, we're going to take down 20 trees, but then, we'll put some replacement trees. And there's sort of this mythological idea that it's an even trade, that if you take down 20 big trees and you put in 20 new trees, it's all the same. It's not all the same in terms of the amount of carbon that's actually stored. So that is the end of what I am going to be presenting, and I want to go ahead and turn it over to Emily and to Kiana.
Thanks, Lynn. Just a second here while I get it pulled up.
No problem.
Okay, is everybody able to see my screen okay?
That's good.
Yep.
Great. So yeah, thank you all for joining us this evening. We are so excited to just get to talk about trees with y'all. Just a couple housekeeping things. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to throw those in the chat or save them for the end, and we'll answer those questions, and we'll have some time at the end for all your burning questions. So yes. So first of all, we just want to introduce ourselves. There's two of us on here from Thurston CD. My name's Tiana Sinner, and I work as the Education Outreach Coordinator at the Thurston Conservation District.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Landris. I work as the Natural Resource Technician and Certified Arborist for the Conservation District as well.
So here at Thurston CD, we've been working with local residents since 1947. We serve residents of Thurston County who reside upon the indigenous lands of the Nisqually, Chehalis, and Squaxin peoples. We're one of 45 districts in the state of Washington, and there's actually over 3,000 soil and water conservation districts nationally. If you're joining us from outside of Thurston County or outside of Washington State, we would encourage you to connect with your local conservation district. So conservation districts were actually formed in the 1930s as a local, place, and community-based response to natural resource concerns. Nationally, conservation districts provide incentive-based programs, education, and non-regulatory technical assistance, and that makes it really accessible and more affordable for private landowners and residents to implement conservation on their property. All of the work that we do is non-regulatory and it's voluntary. And because conservation districts are locally oriented, we're able to build our programming to be really specific to meet our community needs. So I just wanted to take a second and kind of cover the outline for what we're going to chat about today. So we'll be discussing the importance of planting trees, how to choose the correct tree, what kind of climate stressors our trees are facing, how to maintain your plantings, and how we can help you be successful. So at this point, if everyone has is able to do so, feel free to open up your chat box. And I was going to have you share what your favorite tree was, but Lynn already asked that question. So I would love to hear what you're hoping to get out of this workshop, or what brought you here tonight. And maybe Emily can read those out as they pop into the chat box. So we'll just give you a couple minutes just to write that in there, and we'll share those. So again, that's what you're excited about, why you're here at the workshop tonight, and what you're hoping to learn.
Oh, nice. Lauren and Jim say how to pick the right tree for the right area. So don't use a lot of groundwater after establishment. Very good. Yep, that's a really good concern. Margaret has, would you like to come with a plan for planting trees in our condominium community? Oh, very nice. That could be really fun. Julia has how to get info on ideal trees to plant. We'll be going over that. Oh, Maddie's taking an arboricultural class for a master's. Very nice. Congratulations. It was really hard. And wants to know specifically with trees and learn a bit more about trees. And also want to plant some more trees on the property. Awesome. And listen what trees are best. Perfect. And about native trees. We'll learn about native trees, which we will definitely go over today. We are big native tree fans here.
Cool. Thank you all for sharing. That's exciting to hear. And I think we're going to touch on all of those topics. So that's awesome. So first off, I want to discuss stewardship and what it means to be a good steward. To different people, it can mean different things. So stewarding your landscape could mean that you grow and cultivate food. You grow and cultivate food or fibers. Maybe you're a caretaker of the local wildlife, or maybe you spend time beautifying your property. All of those are examples of ways that you could be a good steward to your landscape or your backyard. So why is being a good steward important? There's a lot of reasons. I think it's probably a good assumption to make that everyone on this meeting this evening is in some shape or form cares about the environment. So we all want the water that we drink and the air we breathe to be clean. And many of us also care about local wildlife, and we want to create space for them to live happily. And overall, we really want to just contribute to a healthy community and protect our little pockets of nature. So let's talk about an important way that we can steward our spaces. And that's by planting native species. So we promote the use of native plants for a number of important reasons, and Lynn touched on a lot of these, but I'll just go over them one more time. So they provide food and habitat for our local pollinators and critters. So pollinators like butterflies and honeybees, they really rely on our native plants to have the food and the shelter that they need to survive. Native plants also promote a healthy ecosystem because they provide tons of biodiversity, which means that there's a wide variety of different plants growing in an area, which is really necessary for an ecosystem to function properly. And in the summer, native plants are able to survive without an excess of water or fertilizer or pesticides, while some non-native plants can only sustain with a significant amount of water and fertilizers. And lastly, but not least, they are just beautiful. You can see this photo is a prime example of a beautiful native species called vine maple. And as we go through this presentation, you'll get to see lots of more pretty pictures too. And as we mentioned earlier, our role in the community is to assist, residents to manage the natural resources on their private properties. So when we work with individuals who are interested in stewarding their landscapes, we often suggest native plants that will grow well in their area specifically, and then we offer that advice and guidance on how to successfully install those native plants. So now I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk a little bit about how to choose the right tree for your space.
Awesome. Thank you, Kiana. I'm probably going to keep my video off so my doesn't jump around on me too much. Connections are fun, but thank you for bearing with me. So for starting for trees, what are your property goals? I always like to start there. I like to tell people that no matter their goals, there's a tree that will work for that. In the Pacific Northwest, we have over 50 species of native trees that range from conifer giants to those dainty flowering leaf trees. So when looking at goals, it's important to ask these questions in order to get that right tree. Maybe you want lots of shade to keep your home cooler in the summer, or you want to create a natural privacy screen for your yard. A big question that I always ask is how much maintenance will I want to do with my trees? Trees come in all shapes and sizes, and some are very low maintenance, while others will take a little bit more love and care. It's also important to ask yourself, do I want a fruiting tree? The fruit can be an amazing treat in fall for you and can also be great food for wildlife. Trees comes in two main forms, evergreens or conifers, which keep their foliage all year round, and leaf trees or deciduous trees, which that means they will shed their leaves in fall each year. Now, keep in mind, these questions aren't necessarily a checklist. It's more about balancing goals. For example, evergreen trees will make a wonderful privacy screen, and shade trees because they keep their foliage all year round. However, conifers don't give off edible fruit or have showy flowery blooms. Leaf trees, on the other hand, tend to be much showier, especially in the fall when their leaves change colors. And depending on the tree, they can give wonderful fruits or nuts for you and wildlife. However, leaf trees can be a little bit more work on the maintenance side of things, especially when they lose those beautiful leaves. Picking the right tree will work best for your goals will help your tree be successful and highly enjoyable for you on your property. The last but certainly not least question I like to ask is how many trees do I want? There are some trees that grow exceptionally well in groups. Trees have the ability to communicate with each other via their root systems and a fungal network that allows them to send defense signals if there's a threat such as an incoming pest, or even get aid to neighboring symbiotic plants, which is pretty darn cool. So I know Lynn touched on this a little bit, but it's that important we're going to go over it slightly again for wildlife benefits. And I know we talk about this a lot, but this one it really is important because speaking of symbiotic relationships, trees have many benefits to wildlife, both above the ground and below the ground. Many animals depend on trees for their basic needs: food, water, cover, raising their young. Trees living and dead provide habitat for wildlife. When the trees mature, animals are able to enjoy the delicious fruits and foraging opportunities. During times of extreme heat or precipitation, animals also seek shade and shelter under the trees without being away from their food source, which is pretty important. Now, let's talk about likelihood of success, because we want you to be as successful with your trees as possible. So I want to check into some of these factors, and they really have an important fact on choosing the right tree. I want to quickly discuss what we call the nutrient cycle for trees. As you see in the picture to the right, it really is a cycle of nutrients moving through the tree and being recycled in different forms. The three main components of this cycle are water, sun, and soil. And those help move nutrients through that cycle. Trees, like all plant life, kind of like Lynn mentioned, take up carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. They also store a large amount of carbon, which makes them some pretty amazing neighbors to have. So let's jump into hydrology. So hydrology is pretty important when looking at where you want to plant your tree. How wet is your site? Does it stay wet year-round? Or maybe your property is on the drier side, and even in the winter you don't have any running water. In the Pacific Northwest, we usually end up on the wetter side of things. This makes tree selection all the more important. We have some wonderful native tree species that have adapted to very wet soils. Willows, dogwoods, cottonwoods, just to name a few. Knowing how often your soils are saturated with water will help you choose those water-loving trees, which will be happy to get their feet wet. Or perhaps your site is a little drier and that tree prefers dry and warm instead. There's a tree for that. You have oaks, madronas, which are Sam's favorite tree, highly agree, and pines, and that's just to name a few. Another important factor to look at is soils. So soil type is a really important factor, and it usually goes hand in hand with how wet or dry your property is. There are a few tools and websites that are useful when finding out your soil type. I recommend Web Soil Survey, which is a USDA ran site. At the end of this presentation, we'll be sending out a folder with that link and many other helpful links to get you started. But for a base, it's pretty easy to get a general idea of your soil type. All soils fall into the soil texture pyramid. For those who may have a wetter landscape, you may find your soils on the right of this pyramid, laying it into a silt or silt loam. This will be darker in color and have a lot more organic matter. On the flip side of that, if you are on the prairie, you may find your soils are a little bit sandy, and you're on the left side of that, the sandy loam side of the pyramid. This will look like you might be at the beach, but slightly darker soils mixed in. This soil type will also drain water really quickly. Soils can also become compacted. So this usually occurs in areas with high vehicle, animal, or even human traffic. Compaction is when the soil gets compressed with the pressure and it closes needed air and water gaps between the soil particles. Trees rely on those gaps for their roots to breathe and gather water. If you suspect the area that you're hoping to plant in has been compacted, there are a few neat tools to help aerate your soils. Your local conservation district can offer resources on the best tools depending on your soil type. If we are your local conservation district, please don't hesitate to give us a call. I, for one, love to chat with you about soil and tree root health. I really, really would. But the good news is, no matter what your soils are, there is going to be a tree that's going to be happy to grow there. Let's talk about shade tolerance, because that's another really, really important factor when you're deciding which trees to use or to install. So each tree has a range of how much sun or shade it can grow in. This slide shows the 4 main shade types. Most nurseries will have tabs that show tolerance when you purchase the tree, or if not, this information is widely available online. I recommend looking at the area you are planning on planting in and just keeping an eye out for the sun when it's there, and then how long does that area have sun for. Full sun will be happy in the afternoon hot sun. However, full shade or partial shade trees be much happier either in early morning or late afternoon sun. There are also those trees that are very happy living in understory of established trees. These are full shade trees. So if you wanted to plant amongst trees that are already existing, there are tree species that will be perfectly happy to fit in that space. Another note for planting consideration is your hardiness zone, especially if you're looking at planting ornamental trees. You can find a link for the USDA hardiness zone map in our resources folder that we're going to send out. This is a great way to find out what trees can handle the average low temperatures in your area. For example, here in Olympia, Washington, we are in zone 8 with an average low between 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, all our native trees are well adapted to these winter temperatures, which makes them a really great choice for planting first off. And then we also have, because we were talking about showing beautiful pictures of trees, we also have the example of the handout that's going to be also added into the folder. So we put these together with all these factors that we are considering. This is a great list of trees that span a wide range of different habitats. And you notice they're also kind of sized by height, which is another question I like to ask. How tall do you want your tree to be? Because sometimes that really does matter. If you don't see the tree that you were thinking of planting on this list, no worries. We have more resources and would love to help find that right tree for you. But once you have your tree, we need to talk a little bit about how to plant it. So usually you're going to get two types of plants. We call them potted or bare roots. Now, both potted and bare roots are great options for planting your tree. They do, however, require different techniques when planting. Potted plants are the most common when planting singular trees and come in many different sizes. You can get 1 gallon to 2 gallon, 5 gallon, even larger, though those tend to be a little bit harder to handle. They store well and typically have slow release fertilizer already in the potted soil. Some drawbacks for potted plants is that they can become root bound when they are not changed into a larger pot to accommodate them growing. Root bound is when a tree will hit that wall of the pot and then they'll start to grow in a circle. And that is not ideal because they'll just continue to grow in a circle and it can actually kill itself by doing that, unless you break it up and take it out of its pot in a certain time frame. Another drawback is it may be difficult to identify the root collar of your tree. So the root collar on a tree is where that stem and bark of a tree go into and become the root of the tree. All trees have these transition zones, and it's ideal to plant your tree at the depth where this collar is just above the ground surface. That allows for it to breathe, and it also keeps it from molding and just having too much moisture on it. So when planting bare roots, one of the benefits, it is easy to see that root collar. You can see on the plant to the right where it starts to transition up into from the roots to become bark. That's your root collar. And the other nice thing about bare roots is that you can usually see root issues right away if you have any. Bare roots are often less expensive to buy in bulk as well. Some drawbacks of bare root plants are that they do require a damp and cool storage area so that the roots don't dry out. It can also be easy to J-root a bare root tree. As shown in the picture to the right, a J-root is where a root turns up and starts to grow up towards the surface. That is not ideal. You want to make sure when planting your tree that roots are headed down and out into the soil. Another thing to think about when you start planting your trees is timing. In the Pacific Northwest, it is recommended to plant in either late fall when trees are dormant or early spring before trees begin to really start to grow. Timing for plantings depends greatly on temperature, but usually between November and April for best results. It is recommended to avoid planting when the ground is frozen. So that's why I say temperature really matters. If it freezes in December, might not be the best time to be planting. And we've had that happen, unfortunately. But those are kind of the basics for planting. And where we get to planting, I want to chat a little bit about plants to not plant. Yeah, trees to avoid. So with all this talk of planting trees, I wanted to briefly check in about trees to avoid. Not all non-native trees are considered invasive. Invasive trees get their label because they spread quickly and often outcompete native trees. This creates a reduction in biodiversity and can be very harmful to the environment. This list comes from the Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board, who has assigned an invasive status for trees that are proving to be harmful to our environment. If you live in the Pacific Northwest, chances are you have seen most of these trees. The tree of heaven is an exception because it's not widely spread in our region. However, it is a species of concern due to a pest called the spotted lanternfly that can be very harmful to fruiting trees. Here in Washington State, we love our orchards and want to make sure we protect them from invasive pests. So when looking at tree species to plant, your neighbors and the environment will be grateful if you avoid these trees and any others that come to be listed on the State Noxious Weed Control Board.
A tree of heaven can also be called an ailanthus tree.
It can, yes, thank you. Yep. Most of them, all these different trees have different common names, which can be kind of confusing. And usually we try to do by Latin names, but I did not put those Latin names on there. And I cannot remember the tree of heaven Latin name. I'll get back to you on that though. But I did want to chat a little bit if you already have an issue with trees. Feel free to contact your local conservation district because we can provide sources on how to control these trees. So moving off of invasive trees, we're going to chat a little bit about, I'm going to hand this back over to Kiana, who's going to talk a little bit about climate stressors and how that can affect your tree selection as well as some other things to consider.
Great, thanks, Emily. So now let's just take a minute to discuss some of these climate stressors that Emily just mentioned. So, as you all probably noticed, urbanization is transforming our natural landscape. It's caused fragmentation in habitat, decreased biodiversity, and has disrupted hydrological systems. And it's also altered our local climate. So locally, we're seeing an increase in hot and dry weather during the summer months. Last summer was a perfect example of that. We reached historical high temperatures all over Western Washington, and we had over 85 consecutive days without significant rainfall. And for those of us that have lived in Western Washington for a significant amount of time, we know how odd and unusual that weather pattern is. Unfortunately, due to the effects humans have had on the environment, scientists are predicting that this will become the new normal. So we're already seeing the repercussions from that on our tree populations. So for example, two species that have suffered are western red cedar and big leaf maple. Their health has rapidly declined in certain areas, not all, but due to the hot, dry summers that we've experienced over the last several years. So we kind of want to ask ourselves, how do we plan for the future in regards to tree selection? So we know that trees live a very long time, some longer than others. So we want to be thinking well into the future, like 50 to 100 years. It's kind of weird to think about, but it's an important part of this. So our climate may look significantly different than it does right now. And it's something that's, challenging to predict because it's dependent on how we respond. But the best way that we can start to prepare right now is by planting trees for one, because of all the things that Lynn brought out in her presentation, and also planting a variety of different kinds of trees. So some trees are going to be better adapted or able to adapt to a changing climate than others. And it's going to be beneficial to have different types of trees that will help buffer the loss that we may see in the future from some of the species that aren't able to adapt as quickly as they need to. Also, there's new and emerging science that's considering the idea of how trees that are normally thriving in places like Northern California and Oregon, their northern borders are moving farther north, so into, Western Washington. So, restoration specialists are planting certain trees, so, things like redwoods, and they're successfully growing here as of now. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind, and continue to watch as studies emerge. So one more thing that is really important to talk about is how to be Firewise. So traditionally, we all think of big wildfires being an issue that's on the east side of our state, but as our population has increased, especially in our area, more people have moved into traditionally natural areas. And that, in tandem with the hotter and drier summers that we just talked about, have really increased the risk of homes and businesses in our area being at risk from wildfire that burn in the surrounding forests, grassland, and farm fields. So given the right conditions, really no location is 100% protected from fire. So even those urban city centers. So it's really important to be prepared so that you can reduce your risk. So research shows that embers before and after the actual wildfire flames pose the biggest risk. The embers have the ability to ignite areas around and within our homes. And we each can take precautions around our own homes. So that means considering the immediate surroundings within 200 feet of your homes and other structures and outbuildings on your property. So when you're looking at your home, you need to look for the things that have potential to catch on fire. So this could be things like trees and grass, fences, lawn furniture, all different types of things. And there are 3 kinds of fuel on your property that you want to be aware of. So these are surface fuel, and that's flammable material that's kind of on the ground. Ladder fuels, and so that's flammable material that can carry fire to the tops of trees. So those are things like smaller trees, bushes, low branches. And then there's crown fuels. And the crown, and this is when fire spreads to the crown and canopy of trees. And so fires that reach tree crowns are much harder to control and can create those mass embers called firebrands. So we really want to create an environment on our property where the fire can burn, which, it may happen without negatively affecting our home. And so this means keeping high intensity fire 100 plus feet away and low intensity fire 5+ feet away. So done right, landscaping and vegetation can actually serve as a fuel break and protect our home from encroaching fire. And there's also fire-resistant vegetation that can be planted that's less likely to ignite in a wildfire than something like, some ornamental things that we see often in yards. So the primary goal of Firewise landscaping is to reduce the amount of plant fuel that's around our homes, and then also increase that amount of moisture content in the vegetation around your home. So this can mean taking some time to prune vegetation that's too close to your home, or moving your firewood piles away from your outbuildings. Consider cleaning your gutters of pine needles and leaves. And also thinking about what you plant near your house and how far away it is from your house and things like that. Those are all just things you want to keep in mind as we, have these becoming more of an issue in our area. So there's also tons of great resources available to learn more about how to protect your homes and our natural areas on firewise.org. And then if you're also specifically interested in Firewise landscaping, there's some really great resources on that website about that as well. So if you've chosen your plants and started planting, and you're creating a really beautiful habitat on your property, maintaining those plantings is a really important step to be successful. So we're going to just talk about a couple ways that are important to maintain your planting. So those are mulching, watering, and protecting your plants from herbivory or being eaten by critters. First, let's talk about mulching. So mulch is wood chips, as you can see in this picture here, that we add around our plantings, and they have tons of great positive outcomes. So mulching decreases competition from the grasses and weeds. Grass and weed actually rob water and nutrient from the tree's developing root system and can actually delay its establishment. So mulch also suppresses weed seed from germinating because they have a lack of light. Adding a layer of mulch can reduce soil erosion. Soil erosion removes that topsoil, which contains all the good stuff, all the good organic matter that your trees and plants really need to thrive. And mulch helps your trees soil accumulate more nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And mulch can also reduce water evaporation. So if you apply that mulch, you can actually reduce how often you need to water your plants. Because mulch can keep those plantings cool and moist. Because of our changing climate, it's important to think about watering your plants, especially when they're young. So we'll talk about that next. So during the hot and dry summer months, it may be important to support your planting with a little bit of extra water. Depending on the size of your property and the number of plantings you have, you can hand water with a watering can or garden hose. Or if you have a larger property or more plantings, you could also install irrigation like a drip line. All of these methods work really great. It's just really dependent on your goals and your property. It's also important to note here that native plantings require a lot less water, or most native plantings require a lot less water than garden plants or non-native species that you buy at garden stores. So although watering them is important, you will save time and money by choosing those native plants. Another key to successful plantings in your backyard is to protect new and growing plants from animal herbivory. So plant protectors or netting are both useful in doing this. So the tubes that you see in the picture here help prevent things like deer and rabbits and little rodents from getting at the delicate, small, young plants that we just planted. And then other things like bird netting or splash tape can also be useful to naturally deter browsing animals. And you especially kind of want to think about this when something's fruiting or it's just starting to bud out. You don't want them to eat, the plants when they're small, delicate, and can't really fend for themselves. I also want to really quickly talk about our native plant festival and sale. So this is an opportunity for community members to purchase native plants at an affordable price. That's something that a lot of conservation districts offer. And we offer tons of really cool species. So stuff y'all are mentioned that are your favorite trees. So things like Gary oak, Sitka spruce, Pacific dogwood, shrubs like red flowering currant and native rose, which are really beautiful. We also offer lots of herbaceous flowers like lupin, yarrow, and tons of other ones. So actually tomorrow, our pre-orders for our plant sale are opening. So you can visit our plant sale website at store.thurstoncd.com to pre-order plants if that's something you're interested in. They often can sell out kind of quickly. So if you have a specific species you're looking for, it's good to order early. And we also will have a walk-up, most likely, depending on how things pan out in the next year. But we're hoping to have a walk-up sale in February as well that community members can come and purchase singles of their plant as well. And so once you pre-order your plants, they'll be available to pick up at our walk-up sale, which happens the last weekend of February. So if you have questions about, our plant sale or pre-ordering plants, you can reach out to me. My contact info will be listed at the end of the presentation. So at this point in the workshop, you might be really excited about the endwood options for tree plantings in your backyard, but you might also be thinking, I need help to plan this. And so if that's the case, know that there's lots that we're here to offer that helpful guidance. The Thurston Conservation District offers technical assistance. We offer native planting plans, guidance on natural weed control, educational resources, soil tests, and guidance on Firewise landscaping. So feel free to reach out to request a site visit or just ask a simple question. We're always here and available and happy to help you. So I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your evening to join us. But before we open it up to questions, I want to make sure that we share a few of the resources so you can know how to learn more. So first of all, we have several previously recorded workshops on our website. A lot of them are about gardening or pasture management, but we have one that's entitled on their backyard stewardship, and it has a lot of pertinent information to, adding native plants to your property and how to be successful with that. So that might be something you're interested in. We also offer hands-on volunteer events. These are an opportunity for you to work within your community and also learn some skills that you can apply to your own backyard. Our next exciting volunteer event is Orca Recovery Day, and this is an event that happens all over the West Coast in response to the declining number of southern resident orca whales that are in our local area. So our local event is actually going to be taking place on October 16th at Watershed Park in Olympia, and we'll be removing some invasive species and then also getting to plant some species in that park too. So it'll be pretty fun. And we'll also post a link to sign up to that event in the chat too. And then also just a reminder that the Conservation District is available again to offer one-on-one technical assistance and help you reach your management goals. So feel free to reach out to Emily or myself and we can help answer those questions or else point you in the correct direction. And lastly, we send out a monthly electronic newsletter, which includes all of our upcoming events, community resources, and lots of cool, interesting conservation news. So we'll post a link to that too. And I think Emily's posting those links in the chat. So feel free to visit those. And then also we'll send them an email with all of those links in there as well after the fact so that you don't have to worry about opening up the websites right now. So we also want to provide you, again, like I said, with our contact information. So if you have follow-up questions, you can reach out. But as of now, we'd love to open it up for questions. So feel free to use the comment box or type your questions out, or you can just unmute yourself and ask any questions you have for myself, Emily, or Lynn. So I think we're all available to answer questions.
Yeah, and I should note that TCAT also has a newsletter, and I'm putting in the chat our website, and you can sign up for the newsletter on there. So if this is your first time coming to a TCAT event and you want to kind of keep track of what's happening for fighting climate change in our community, then you might want to get on our newsletter.
For sure. So I was just going to circle back to some of the comments that came in just to make sure we want to answer everybody's questions. There was a comment that came in about protecting old growth and planting more hardwoods. We fully support that. We have a beautiful hardwood that is our Gary oak that could really use a little bit more proliferation and planting in our area. So we definitely want to support that. And also had a really good point about species diversity. So if you're planting large numbers of trees, we really recommend diversifying those trees. It makes them healthier, it makes them stronger, and it also adds a lot more habitat to the environment so that things can grow and be healthy. Another question is, yes, we are giving the tree list. It will be in that resource folder. And if, like I said, if there's another tree that you really, really want, Montgomery cypress, yes, we can definitely look at that. It's one of those where that technical assistance is really handy because we can look at your specific site and then kind of give guidance off of that. And then let's see. There was a question that came in. Do we think we can keep up with replanting trees with more wildfires and logging occurring? That's a really hard question.
I'll say a little something about that. One of the things that TCAT's Tree Action Group is working on is we are working with our local jurisdictions to try to get ordinances that better protect our trees in our community. So probably all of you have like driven by a lot forever that had tons of trees on it, and then one day you drive by and oh, the trees are all gone. And that is because we don't have very good protections. Like right now, if development happens, they can basically clear cut a lot. And that's not really necessary. Like you can develop a lot without taking out every single tree on it. And also for like residential, the way our ordinances are written, there's a minimum number of trees that you have to keep on a certain size, and you can cut down to that minimum level. And we just have to protect our trees better than that. If as development is happening in particular. So that's why we're trying to get the stronger tree protections. It's a little bit of a different issue in terms of logging that's actually happening. The mitigation plan does call for a lot of tree planting. Originally, it called for 39,000 acres in our county to be planted, which I'm not sure there's actually enough space for that. But we are going to need to plant lots and lots of trees in order to mitigate for climate, not to mention logging. So, if you look at your yard and, you have, 2 or 4 trees, but you recognize that there's space for more, it is one of the ways you can contribute is by planting some more trees in your yard.
Yeah, absolutely. Looks like we have a couple of hands up. Donna, did you want to speak?
Yes, I did. I'm on a Kindle. There's no way I can copy the addresses where you listed them in chat. Are you going to include those with whatever you're sending us?
Yes, those will also be.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Oh.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Sorry, we're trying not to
Thank
talk over
you.
each other.
All right. Thank
yes.
you.
And Michelle?
Hi, I have a question. Just got in late because I just got this email. So we've planted trees since we've been here last year, and our neighbor gave us some really good resources on how to obtain more trees. We really didn't know, so we were buying them, like $100 a piece, and that's simply not sustainable for us. And so, am I hearing correctly that if you want to reforest your land, when we moved here, we have a large backyard. We simply don't need the backyard. We'd love to reforest it. So how would you go about? Is this an additional resource to get some seedlings and some little baby trees? Because I don't really know what I'm doing. And we've two trees out of 18 died because the soil wasn't tested. They just weren't deep enough or something. And we just moved here, and we're just really want to support foresting the area.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Kim,
Michelle, yeah, absolutely. Michelle, that's so wonderful to hear that y'all are like committed to, adding some trees to your property. That's super great. So yes, to answer your question, there's kind of 2 pieces to that question that I'm hearing. So first, the Conservation District does offer that one-on-one technical assistance. And so we come out to, community members' property, and we can look around and do a site visit, is what we call it, and help you decide what kind of plants are going to thrive on your property specifically, and then offer some suggestions and guidance about that.
Okay,
so, right. Yeah. And then I'll add to that, there are a lot of residents in our area that are looking for that assistance. So there is a wait list. But it's something that would eventually happen as we kind of get through our list of people. And then the second thing I wanted to address that you mentioned was purchasing plants. So like I had mentioned earlier, we have the Conservation District has a annual native plant sale, and we offer, bare root and or plugs for people to purchase, and they're really affordable prices. So, anywhere from when you pre-order them, they come in bundles of 5 or 10, and they're anywhere from $10 to $30 for 10 plants. So you can get a pretty wide variety for that $100 you're maybe spending on one plant at a store. But again, keep in mind that they're bare roots, and so they're a little bit different than like a big mature potted plant. But
Right.
still, just a really great option. Yeah. So yeah, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I wanted to
No
also
problem. Thanks.
I wanted to also add, and this is not to in any way undercut the native plant sale, that the city of Olympia is having an Arbor Day celebration on Saturday. It'll be down at the landing there, right, sort of by the community center. It's Percival, thank you. And they are giving away native trees on a first come, first serve basis. So that also could be a way, if you're just, wanting to get one or two, that might be a way to do that.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Lynn. That's great. And also, I'll be down there. We're having a booth and going to be tabling there. So if you want to come, if anyone wants to come chat more with me, I'm going to be there and happy to talk to anybody.
Awesome. And we do have a question in the chat. If they could, we can put that information in the chat for their Arbor Day, for Olympia's Arbor Day. If that's a possibility. And then we had another question come in. We're going to get a little close on time here. But a question about grants and the availability of grants for communities to apply for and purchase plants for tree plantings. And I don't know if anyone else, Lynn, do you know of any grants, or maybe Kiana?
Can you repeat what the question is? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it is, or let me find it again here. Are any grants available for communities to apply for to purchase and plant new trees?
And when somebody says communities, I'm wondering if they mean like condo communities, or I don't know.
HOAs, yeah.
HOAs,
probably.
yeah. I'm not aware of any grants. I think that the city will be planning under the mitigation plan where they want to plant trees. And as I said, there's a huge number that they need to plant. But I would say that's probably a couple of years down the road when they will get it figured out where they want to plant them. I see what Michelle is saying. So if you have an area, where you're like, yes, I would, give I would make 2 or 5 acres available for the planting of trees. I would say stay tuned, because they may be looking for people to volunteer, that sort of thing. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think some more planning is going to have to happen before that can take place. I'm going to ask a question of our friends here from the CD. So you have that thing about the J root, and so I'm assuming you just physically turn it back down if it's sticking up like that was showing.
Yeah, that's a really good note. Thank you, Lynn. Because usually with those that are very severe, like if they just go back up, and sometimes they go the other way, it depends on how severe. Usually, sometimes you can just turn them back down and plant them. Other times it is appropriate to take some pruners and trim them. The key is not to trim the taproot. Most trees will have a taproot that stems from that main stalk that goes down. You don't want to touch that. It's the arterial roots that go out that are okay to trim back a little bit.
And my kind of follow on that, and I also wanted to say, don't worry about the time. I think we can just go till we've answered everybody's questions, and anybody who needs to go before then is certainly free to do that. My follow-on question is about replanting. So I have about 2-year-old walnut tree that a squirrel planted by my house, but the squirrel did not have your guidelines about tree planting and does not understand anything about foundations or any of that sort of thing. And so I am waiting for it to be, tree planting time, and then I'm going to replant it. So any things I need to keep in mind about replanting?
Awesome. Yeah, squirrels are amazing that way. They plant a lot of trees for us, which is really, really cool. But yeah, they don't always get the right placement. So I guess the first thing I would ask, how large is it? We do recommend there's a size. Usually it's anywhere less than about 3 feet tall. They get too tall and they get really stressed out if you try to replant them.
Well,
But
it's
if
right.
he's-
It's right at 4 feet right now.
Okay, so which is still okay if you think he's not going to live where he's at or you don't want him where he's at. You're just going to want to have to go give a little bit of a wide rim around, like with this shovel, to make sure you don't cut into his roots too deeply. And what we have, they call it a drip line. So wherever those trees branches stretch out and go down, go a little bit farther out than that. It's like 2/3 out, which can be a huge amount if you have a huge tree. But then you can guarantee and you kind of get to excavate those roots out. And it's okay to bare root one of those guys. You just don't want to cut into his roots too deeply. And then kind of gently pull them out. And then if you're bare rooting him, you either want to keep him wet, damp until you can replant him, or if you're just moving him to replant, then just go ahead and put him where you would like him for sure. That was a really good question, though.
Thank you.
We do have quite a few questions. Sorry, I'm just going to kind of circle back
That's
up
okay.
here. I'm definitely going to have to get back to some people on grants. There's not a whole lot that I know of either for tree plantings, but I would definitely willing to do some research on that because that would be a really handy thing and needed for this area for sure. Yeah, a lot of cutting down trees. Yeah, it can be pretty unfortunate. So Michelle, you had a question about Western red cedars. You're still.
Yeah, I was just curious about when you can you trim the lower branches or the skirt? Is that a healthy for the tree? Because when we moved in, we felt like looking around at the trees that some of the cedars needed just some trimming at the bottom.
I would say yes, depending on how large it is. Usually, even baby trees, you can start bringing them up, but don't take out more than 3/4 of their canopy. So that kind of can depend on how large they are. If they're very large, you can actually bring them up pretty tall. If they're smaller, you're only going to want to bring them up a little bit.
So they're about 60 feet high.
Oh, so those are pretty big.
So then you probably would be okay to do the bottoms, maybe just to
Yep.
clean it up a little bit. Okay, cool. And the
Yep.
alders that are lining our driveway, the alders live short. Do they have shorter lifespans than the cedars?
They do. Yeah, around here, alders kind of live around 80 to 90 years on a good healthy alder. Cedars are upwards of that. They can live 100 to 200 years. So they have a much different lifespan. But they also have a much different kind of role in the ecosystem. Red alders are really good nitrogen fixers. So they'll actually fix your soil. And cedars kind of have their different role. They're longer lived, they're more shade trees, and they produce a lot of forage for different animals. So kind of two different things, two great trees, but yeah, they do definitely have their separate lifespans.
Cool. I have one more question, please. So we have a tree that fell while we were gone and we came back and we just kind of left it because it seemed like it's still growing. And wildlife has moved in and I'm wondering if that's okay, just kind of leave it.
Yeah, if it's not bothering you, yeah, down trees can be wonderful habitat. Deadwood actually has a really good, also as a carbon like hold for things as it decays. But yeah, it's great animal habitat for rodents and other things that will use that.
And the property we bought, we found a tree that is a nurse tree. It has 3 or 4 other trees growing out of it. I've never seen anything like it before. So we're trying to protect that and make sure that it's well protected as the construction happens around us.
Oh, perfect. We appreciate that. Yeah, those are so neat to find around the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, thank you.
Emily, there's a question about disease, which I hope you'll read and answer. And I'd like you to go even broader than the person asked about, because my understanding is there are new tree diseases that are popping up because of climate change. And so what do people need to be aware of as they're picking trees around that?
Yes, and that's a pretty big, broad topic. We could do a whole separate webinar on tree diseases, but I appreciate the question because it is a pretty big impact on our environment right now. So I'm just going to read quickly to make sure I understand the question. For cedars, which are doing, oh, you're losing a lot of cedars. And there's a few reasons that could be. We really do recommend having an arborist out if you're truly concerned about having a disease issue, because sometimes diseases look a lot like environmental stressors. So it's really good to have someone who can get hands-on and look at it and kind of identify what's actually going on, because there can be a couple different reasons why trees die. Drought has been really affecting the cedars lately. And then we also have some bug pests. We have like root rot. There's quite a few different things. So I don't want to name one thing right now without actually having looked at it. But
Emily,
that would be, yes.
I asked that question not because I have a disease in mind, only because there was a bunch in our area that have died, and they died of a very, specific disease to Port Orford cedars. I thought maybe you guys would know something about it and you could report on that situation as well. So it sounds like that's not necessarily true.
Not to my knowledge. I could do definitely a little more research on it, but there's quite a few specific diseases that hit our specific trees. Unfortunately, most are brought in via people, or we bring in a lot of non-native trees which don't interact very well, so we bring in pests that way. They kind of get grouped into two different categories. We have our native diseases, which our native trees are pretty resistant to and can handle for the most part okay. And then we have our imported pests and diseases that our native trees really don't do well with. And another factor in that is biodiversity. Kind of what I was mentioning before, if you have a monoculture of a tree, they're way more susceptible to kind of wiping out an entire forest, versus if you have a lot of different variable trees, they kind of compensate for each other.
Emily, you mentioned root rot, and I'm wanting to understand how really widespread that is, because we've had several situations where developers like cleared all the trees and they said, oh well, they all had root rot. And I find this suspicious.
Yes, me too. So there's actually a couple different types of root rot, and they kind of tend to go with certain tree species. Firs are really susceptible. Like laminated root rot really hit our Douglas firs really hard. And it kind of goes back to everybody having planted that one monoculture tree that made it really susceptible. And unfortunately, it's a natural fungus that's in our soil, so there's nothing we can do to remove that disease or that fungus necessarily. The answer usually is plant something else that is resistant. So yes, it might be completely feasible to remove your Douglas firs or remove those trees that are infected. However, most of it turns into a monetary value. Try to remove those trees where you could still get like tonnage or something out of them before they die, which can be a completely reasonable thing to do. Or in some cases, I recommend just putting down some baby trees that are resistant and then leaving those older trees standing, because it'll take a while for that laminated root rot to actually get to those trees and do any damage.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, but I've heard that a lot. Yeah, that's kind of the logger mantra.
Yeah,
we got to take them all out. They're diseased, but it's really, it's not about having that disease. It's about kind of diversifying and building back your forest.
Mm-hmm. Well, folks, do we have more questions before we wrap up?
I think
Well,
that might be it.
I just want to mention any tree fans that are here who feel like you want to join the work to protect the trees in our jurisdiction. Feel free to contact me about joining our tree action group. That would be Lynn at thirstonclimateaction.org. So be happy to have any tree fans join us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lynn, for having us. Thank you to you and to TCAT. This was really wonderful, and thank you for everybody that joined tonight and spent their evening talking about trees with us. It's right up Emily and my alley, so it was fun for us. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
No, it was great to do this with you guys. Okay, well, I'm probably gonna hit the end meeting button.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Great.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.